Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to our continuing live coverage over here at the Fouke Monster Festival. With me is Daniel Allen Jones from the Vortex. How are you doing, my friend?
Be here with you.
Absolutely, man. Glad that you were able to make it out here. I mean, not so much of a trek for you coming in from Dallas, but boy, howdy, the long drive from Austin after coming in from Atlanta the same day was more than fun.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You know, we're some road warriors sometimes when it comes to getting out of these places, and I think it's definitely worth it just because when you get here, you realize, wow, it's such an awesome group, a great community of people interested in these types of things that we're all trying to explore and understand the best we can. So I'm glad to be here. It's an honor to be able to have you here providing this coverage for us, and you're doing an awesome job so far.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be able to connect with all these guys and a bunch of friends, and so it's been a great time so far.
Yeah, I was mentioning the community earlier in my previous broadcast because in Mineola it was great to see a whole town come out to support a community, but it's a little bit different here when the MC asked like how many people are local. There were like 10 people out of 200 that raised their hand. Everybody here traveled to be part of this show. And to come and attend, hear the talks, everything else. So it's pretty incredible to see folks willing to drive this far to come out to an event like this. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I've been out to Fouke now probably something like a dozen times, and it's really an interesting place because of the lore, the legend, of course, and all the different ideas about the Boggy Creek phenomenon, which has been featured in the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is now the 50th anniversary. And then you have the same types of fun things with Bigfoot and Sasquatch and all these mystery creatures and monsters being used now in the town as a more celebratory type of deal. So it's a lot of fun for people to come out to this type of event. I think one of the bigger contributors to why people are coming in is that a lot of the promotion done for this is usually done way ahead of time, and so you have people that, as they continue to hold events, are making sure they want to be on board for the next one because this is an annual type of function. So it's something that the locals here, they know about all the time, and maybe they get to kind of experience it on a more regular basis as far as seeing the interest in knowing people are coming out to places like the Monster Mart, which is just down the street. So for the other people, maybe once a year is how often they can come out. So it's something that I think is a good opportunity for anyone to travel down here, see the local area, check out what's going on in town, as well as the fun places and sites that have some kind of historic value when it comes to, like we say, the Legend of Boggy Creek or the Beast of Boggy Creek, as is authored by Lyle Blackburn, probably the biggest proponent of this whole thing we're here looking at and celebrating and exploring. So it's been great.
Now, of course, on the Vortex, you've talked to UAP investigators, cryptozoologists, all types of paranormal. When was it that you first heard of the Fouke Monster and the Legend of Boggy Creek?
Well, you know, it must have been about 10 years ago, you know, when we would do some meetings up in the area where I'm in, which is kind of the DFW area over in Texas, and we had a group that was looking into all of these interesting, mysterious topics that we'd have meetings, a lot like what we have here today, but scaled down on a more regular basis. So Lyle came and gave a presentation on his book, which was new at the time, The Beast of Boggy Creek. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting to find out it's not just one of these ideas of Sasquatch being up in the Pacific Northwest. It's not just the interesting ideas of the Patterson-Gimlin film in California and all of this, but it's something right here in the South, not too far away from where I am. And so I thought that's a really cool opportunity to look into something that's Bigfoot related in my own backyard, so to speak. So from that point, I took the time to kind of not only read his book, but to look into the other fascinating aspects of what we kind of refer to as the Southern Sasquatch, and maybe what it could be, or what could be, you know, relating some of these ideas in a way that it's not just an isolated phenomenon. So I've been looking into that for a little while just because it's something that I'm in the region of, and I'd like to be able to kind of see that we continue to hold these types of events, because there are people who, as you just said, you know, or even local people who have no idea that we do these types of things and probably are really interested or might have sightings or experiences and encounters that go back. And that's another way that people can come out of the woodwork and share about something, is by, helping to have this type of stuff. So for myself, it's been about a decade, and since that time, I've been coming out and regularly involved with functions like this, going out to the actual Boggy Creek, as people are going on the tour to go see, and it's really cool because it has that historic value where some people that drive by might have no idea, and others are going out there and in some cases even stealing the sign. It's the most stolen sign in all of Arkansas.
Yeah, absolutely. And a while ago, Marvin Leeper got up, and a former folklore professor, and was talking about the importance of oral histories, especially tribal cultures, things like that. And of course, in the Pacific Northwest, there are tons of stories all over the place. They're actively considered just a resident of the woods and really another tribe. That even some of the tribes say that they have active communication, active trade with. They leave gifts for them, things like that. But like you were mentioning, hearing things like the Fouke Monster, Legend of Boggy Creek, stuff like that, it's really interesting how amongst Anglos in the Northwest, everything is pretty much the same. But once you get down here into the southeast part of the United States, these things take on colloquial name. They whether it's skunk ape, stuff like that. It's really interesting to see the localization of that amongst things and amongst places across the United States.
Right. There are a lot, as you just said, many of these different regions and their respective cultures, and the groups that are native to these areas that go back even hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years, that attempt to do what they can to carry on these traditions and the knowledge. This is where I think it's fascinating to see how the role and study of anthropology can come into play with something called ethnozoology, where you have cultures that maybe are of varying origins that have a knowledge base of the locale, that have an understanding about the local wildlife and their tongue and their language and their programming that they use to try to share knowledge through enculturation, which is passing down information. So it might be, as Marvin had mentioned earlier, we have this idea of the telephone game, and sometimes that does play a role in how things get disseminated or misinterpreted after a while. But I think for the most part, you do have these oral traditions, like you said, which carry on these ideas, especially in this area we call, Texarkana or something like that. It's like all the combination of Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. And in this sort of area, you have this notion that maybe these creatures have been roaming around and trying to kind of work the waterways. And even in southeast Oklahoma, which people wouldn't normally think, I guess, that you have a lot of Bigfoot tourism in places like Hochatown, near Broken Bow, and Idabel, which have places like Gas Squatch, which is a huge, sign of a Sasquatch holding up a gas pump. It's a gas station, but the whole town is kind of a Bigfoot theme. It's like, as UFOs and aliens are to Roswell, Bigfoot is to places like Hochatown and others like here in Fouke, Arkansas. And so it's something that really has become integrated into the modern culture and the community of people who are interested in this to not just acknowledge it, but to participate in it actively as a way of community functions like these types of events here, festivals, conferences. So it's really interesting to see how that type of anthropological knowledge has been carried down throughout the centuries into what it is today, and how that can be seen in many communities as a way to kind of make sure that we can keep that intact. Some people might be opinionated if it's respectful or not. I think it's important to just show that at least we're here openly discussing it. We can acknowledge that it's been an important part of history. And like you said, you have all of these different things, even in Texas. I'm a native Texan. You have things like the Holly Hymn, the Dayton Monkey Man, the Caddo Critter, the Sabine Thing, all of these different sort of regional names and identities. That's just it. And it's something that I think can be a lot of fun, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're all necessarily extremely different creatures. Maybe you have sort of the same types of creatures, if that's what they are at all, that are maybe subspecies or related genetically. So it could mean a lot for us to make sure that we recognize the cultural importance, but also maybe the biological importance in the same way.
Yeah, and it's great to see cities like Fouke truly embrace something like the Fouke Monster, because of course you could there are numerous places across the country that have embraced these things. I mean, a prime example is Salem. Like, you could not get a bigger example of the horrors of American history. But the way that they have embraced their history, the way that they have said that, yes, this is something that happened, but we need to educate ourselves about it. And they have turned that around to being a boon for their town. It's very much the same way with a lot of the towns like Fouke, where even last night at the speakers dinner, stuff like that, I'd mentioned as we were waiting for the tables, if there was a table being held for the Fouke Monster Festival. And our waitress came up about 20 minutes later and was like, I didn't realize, are you guys here for the Fouke Monster Festival? It's like, yeah. She was like, I'm from Fouke. I had no idea that we had a monster festival.
Oh, well.
Number one. Number two, it's one of the most amazing things in the history of my life, like the stories that my family have told me, things like that. And it actively started volunteering to contact her friends who had had sightings to come on the show and talk to us and things like that. So the way that they embrace it and the way that they are willing to share their stories like that is what I love. The fact that they are willing to grab a stranger and go, oh, that's why you're here? Well, you should hear this story too, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a really important part about what we can do as a researcher or an investigator to connect with the local community and see things from their point of view and try to get an understanding about how it's been for them in their upbringing, whereas maybe an outsider might see it or understand it differently. We can glean a lot from the people who've grown up with these stories as a regular part of maybe being a child and understanding that some of these types of stories might have a more impactful meaning to someone who has been a part of the history, who's got connections in their family. And I think that's a really great way for us to see that there are people that know someone or has had an encounter, an experience from all walks of life. And it's something that we can do in a way that when we get to a place like this, you can go and, as you just mentioned, find people that say, yeah, I'm from here, I'm from there, and you know what? My family has this happen, or we knew about this. And I think that's a really great way to connect the dots and show that there's a valid history behind the phenomenon. Whether it's this or that can be discussed as well. But just to show that there has been an interest, and it's not just something that's been concocted in modern times only because of something on a sci-fi movie or some kind of horror flick or something like that. So I think that it's really important to see that can affect people's understandings, but that's not really going to account for the total sum of all of these different historic knowledge bases of people that have come forward that know about this, as Marvin had mentioned, that you can see has gone on well before there were any movies made about this or anything. So it's really important that we continue to acknowledge and value the heritage of these places that really show us that it can be sometimes a gold mine for people coming out and wanting to talk with locals and eyewitness, people that are really involved in a way that otherwise you just have to kind of try to find something by way of old articles and stuff like that. So it's cool to know that there are people who are from here that are interested, but there are also people who want nothing to do with it or think that nothing of it. So that are like, oh, well, I've heard stories. Nothing really happened in my family, and I've been hunting out on the creek my whole life, what for you has been the most interesting story that you have heard come out of Fouke? Because like you said, you've been coming here for a little while. It's not your first trip here, definitely not your first trip to the festival. What's been one of the most interesting things you've heard out here? Well, I think as far as this particular event, the branding of it, we've done this for 4 years now, and it always seems to draw in about a full crowd, and the room is always packed. That tells me that there's not only just enough interest, but people are trying to make sure that they can reserve a spot and to be able to get a chance to check out what the speakers are going to say, see what all the vendors have. The main thing that I think helps to bring people out of the woodwork about sharing stories are supportive networks like this. Before this one, there were a few other events that celebrated this as a conference format, and before it was more of a festival where people got together and just kind of openly had a bit of a fun event in the town. So with things like that, you do have people come forward and say, you know what, I saw something this time, or this happened with someone I knew or a relative or someone not too long ago. And so because of that, it's not just a historic incident that happened one time or just a few times, but it seems like it might be an ongoing phenomenon. That to me is particularly interesting because it shows the longevity of such types of creatures' ability to kind of adapt, if this is the case, in an area where we would think, okay, you know, there's modern encroachment to some extent. We're out in some pretty intense wild areas. You know, we've got the river bottoms over here, the Sulphur River, you know, the swamps and all these things, which most people, you know, would never dare to go into. But obviously, throughout that time, and since the movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, has come out over 50 years, there is a little bit more industrialization and encroachment into those wildlife areas. So with that, you also have more eyes out in the field to maybe bear witness to things that could be lurking out in the dark or where most people wouldn't think to check. So because of that, I do think you have modern reports and sightings. If any of them are real and valid reports of some anomalous creature, that could be something really important for us by way of understanding this is still here. It's not just something that happened way back then, which that's great, but we can still maybe find something that's out there. And I think it's really important that we not only open our minds, but open our eyes to the possibility that we can get out there and look and just enjoy the beautiful wildlife. When I'm here, I usually like to stay out at the local park. It's a free place to camp, and people say there's activity out there. And I think it's one of the ways that we can, as either field researchers or just investigative reporters or whatever it is we're doing to contribute to this meaningful work, is that it's important to see that when people share a story, you know, it sometimes can be easy for others to dismiss or to be disregarding of. I think it's really a fascinating idea to think that if someone tells you they saw what they think is Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the Fouke monster, even, you know, 10 years ago, 5, 1 year ago, a few months ago, to me that's fascinating to think like, wow, it's still going on. If people are really seeing these things, it's not misidentification, then that means that something is still out there. I don't think it means it necessarily is always the same one as people were seeing like way back then. But it could mean that maybe there's a viable population, and maybe that these things are roaming around. And as they say, he always follows the creeks, you know, and I think that could be a good way for us to understand migratory patterns, if they're nomadic or not, if they're trying to be opportunistic as far as their dietary things. So with people sharing their stories, I think that's been the most fascinating, and finding tracks, finding what they think are forms of evidence as an ongoing phenomenon, not just something that happened as a, you know, singular historical instance.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 10 minutes left before break's over. We get back into presentations, things like that. With our last few minutes, what we just got done hearing from Chester Moore just a minute ago, author of Hog Wild. He actively works with Texas Parks and Wildlife and conservation efforts, things like that. I found it very interesting in his presentation that it wasn't so much about Bigfoot, but about the other things out there. Because, a lot of people are going out to the national parks to do this. And amongst safety concerns out there are, you know, like he was saying, go watch Murder Mountain on Netflix. Like there are drug cartels out in the national forest with grow operations, all kinds of things. So as opposed to when we were kids back in the 90s, stuff like that, going out and camping. Not that those things didn't exist, but there's definitely been somewhat of a movement away from that in society. Not as many people are out camping as there used to be, and there have definitely been some things that have popped up. I mean, missing 411 is now a huge thing, showing how many people go missing in state parks every year across the United States. And what advice would you give people going out in the woods in the middle of the night to go do these things and go out and search? Because it really is one of those, like, you've got to be aware. You've got to be aware of your surroundings. You should probably know what a hog wallow looks like, just so you don't run into a, you know, group of wild hogs in the middle of the night. But what advice would you give folks out there trying to get in the field and do this research as far as protecting themselves, being safe, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think about this a lot because I've put myself in some foolhardy situations where I realize, wow, I probably should have been more careful.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's something that, you know, sometimes because we are really enthusiastic about getting out and being into an area where it's very remote and there's probably what we would think are not a lot of people. And this is also something Chester has brought up before, is that, and I think is a very good, valid point, is that people are probably the most dangerous thing you could encounter out in the wild.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other very natural things that you would want to be cautious of. I would be very blunt in saying that Bigfoot's probably the least of your concerns.
Yeah.
If you encountered one, it's very unlikely, although that would be amazing if under the appropriate circumstances where it's safe. You have all these other natural threats involved, especially here in the South with hogs. You've also got the possibility of wild cats, big cats. You
Bear.
have snakes. You have all kinds of other little vermin and things, which probably aren't going to be too big of a threat, but you are in their territory. And you also have insects and things. I remember maybe not last time, but a few years ago when I was at Alex Smith, I ended up getting a tick on me, and I was worried at first. I seemed okay afterward, but just something like that, the smallest thing you wouldn't normally think could do you in, is an easy way to deter you from wanting to get back out there. So to play it safe, I'd say be prepared, do what you can to not only bring the appropriate attire, do what you can to be aware of the conditions of the elements if you can, being that it's the weather, the condition of the foliage, the greenery, if it's going to be whatever time of year, if it's more dense in the spring and into the summer, or if the fall and winter are going to be a little bit more open, you can see through more clearly. Sometimes when you're out in a very thicketed area, if you're out in the winter, you can see pretty clear for several yards, whereas if it were overgrown, you might not. So you have to be very careful when you're out in a place where you can't see very clearly. You could be right around the corner for something you probably wouldn't want to. So you would probably want to be aware of track and sign a little bit, and scat, to know and maybe at least do what you can to identify things that you notice and try to acknowledge patterns that you see, whether it's tracks from certain animals, whether it's hair, scat or feces left by the local wildlife, because you're encroaching upon their territory.
That's right.
So you have to be careful and not just full-heartedly running around and rummaging through, kind of run and bump in the night just for fun. So I think that if you have the right equipment, have the right mindset and attitude, and the right respect for these places and their what they're hosting as a guest inside, it's something you have to know either way, as prepared as you can be or think you might be. Anything can happen. So always expect there to be something that you want to make sure you can be careful about. Don't go in without being considerate of those possibilities, because you probably won't find Bigfoot, but you might, if not anything else, see a lot of really awesome things that indicate, wow, there's normal, regular wildlife everywhere.
Sure.
And I'm totally fine with that. I enjoy it. I think everyone should. Maybe have your phone or camera ready in case you see anything, whether it's Bigfoot or not. It's always fun, I think, to be able to look at and practice. If you see something, maybe you see a possum scurry by, or you see a snake, come through. Any of those types of things should alert you to be able to be in a position where if maybe you did encounter Bigfoot, you can pull up your phone really quick, or get out your camera, or do something that's going to be practical in any type of wildlife encounter. And as Chester mentioned, you have to be careful either way, and it's not something you can just be dismissive of. And I think that it's important to just do the best you can to be prepared physically, mentally, emotionally, because sometimes you don't realize that the detriment you can be put in by running into other people, not knowing what the state of mind that they're in is in as well. So people are probably the most dangerous thing you could encounter out there. Yeah. But hopefully, if you do, it'll be under safe circumstances. Be careful of other animals and wildlife, and do what you can to have a good time and enjoy it and make some good memories.
Absolutely. And of course, just follow those Boy Scout rules. Anything you pack in, pack out. Travel with a friend. Let somebody know your general direction. Maybe even install the last known location on your phone. That's now an option on most phones, where it will ping an emergency contact with your last known location whenever your phone dies or loses contact. That way, if you're out in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m. and your phone dies, somebody at least knows where to start looking. I remember growing up, my mom was always, just tell me what direction you're going so I know where to start looking for the body. You know,
Right.
I
Those are all
gotta
good valid points,
tell the police a general direction that you went in. Did you go east today? Is that where you're going? You're going to Billy's? He lives that way. Cool. That's all I need. The rest of the night, it happens. But let somebody know what direction you're headed off in. You know?
Those are all really good points that I think everyone should let someone know, because I've been in situations where I thought, well, if I disappeared, no one would know for days.
Would know.
I probably should have let someone know where I am. But,
it's
things
hard,
turn out okay,
when you get the bug or you've got it on your plan to go Saturday, hey, life happens. That may be the furthest thing from your mind, is even just texting me like, hey, man, I'm going out into the middle of the woods. Just letting somebody know. You know, you don't see me post on Monday. Give me a text. Things like that.
You should let people know, and I think that's another way that you can at least show and be prepared with either something to drink or eat if you don't have a way to get to a vehicle or to the road. Because if you're in the remote wilderness and you don't know how to forage, you don't know what types of things you can find that are edible or safe, or potable water that you can at least make drinkable or clean enough to use on yourself, because there's a lot of
how to make
things
fire.
Exactly. And if you're even in a situation like that, something's already gotten to the point where if you're not able to get to any of those other things and you're trying to get into survival mode, there's probably a few things that were overlooked. And if you're in that situation, do the best you can to send smoke signals or whatever, because you have a few ways that you can try to get by. But other than that, and I'm being cynical about the smoke signals. Obviously, if you can make a fire, you've probably been able to get to a point to where you can get out of there. I think it hopefully doesn't come to that. But it is important to know that if there are situations you're going to put yourself in that you are deliberately doing, you're not just like somehow winding up in a an environment, but you should at least look into survival skills and some of the things that might come in handy when you're out there on your own or with a small group that you can use as a simple, like you said, something that you can almost relate to is you would see that is taught in Boy Scouts or something like that. That's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of smoke signals, we are almost out of break. We're getting ready for our next presenter. Ken Gerhardt is coming up. Cannot wait. He's giving a presentation on the Minnesota Iceman. So that should be super fun. Thank you so much for your time. Hope we have some more time to have you back on later on in the day, kind of wrap things up, Daniel. Let everybody know where they can go to follow you, where they can go to socially stalk you online and find out everything from the Vortex.
Yeah, if I get lost out there in the woods, hopefully you can just reach out and I'll be able to respond at some point on the Vortex, and that's on all social media. I'm pretty widely accessible, and I would like to make a shout out to not only all the great speakers you mentioned earlier, but also Lyle Blackburn. We talked about all these things going on with Boggy Creek, the Fouke Monster. He came out with a really cool book called the Boggy Creek Case Book that deals with all these modern sightings that lead up to this. That would be a great reference for anyone interested in finding out about this local cryptid, as well as how to make sense of all these other ones. So I'm glad to be able to reach out and continue the discussion on any of these platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all this sort of stuff. So great to be here.
Absolutely, man. And I always thank you for coming on. There's been numerous times where I've got a few guests where I can just drop a line and be like, hey, what are you doing Tuesday? I had somebody drop out. So I always want to thank you for the time that you spend with us, with our audience, for sharing your vast realm of knowledge in the world of cryptozoology, paranormal, UFOs, UAPs. Cannot wait for your new book to come out. It's going to be fantastic. Thanks so much.
Chris,
we'll have you back on here in a bit.
Look forward to it.
Stay tuned, everybody, for our continuing coverage of the Fouke Monster Festival 2022 50th anniversary of the Legend of Boggy Creek. We'll be right back after this, folks. Well, hello, everybody. Oh, my. Hold on. Our camera went a little wonky there. Hold on. Let me fix it. This is the cool thing about technology. We can fix it right here while we are live on air. How about that? Hey, there it is. Hot diggity. There we are, guys. Sorry about that. Nothing like fixing it all live on air, Daniel. You know? All right. So, Welcome to our final bit of coverage here, folks, of the Fouke Monster Festival. Daniel Allen Jones from the Vortex joining me once again for our last segment.
It's been so long, right?
I know. Man, Lyle's talk just now was really fantastic.
Absolutely.
I love hearing him speak. He is so entirely passionate about the town of Fouke, the story, and you know, yeah, it's interesting to see researchers like that really help bring things more to light, you know, and go out, get involved in the community, and become entrenched in the local community the way he has, where locals just come to him. They know that if you have an experience, Lyle's the guy that you need to go talk to, you know, and it's great to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that this is something that has caught my attention in more recent years, is that this is something of a work of anthropology where people are coming into a community as an outsider, attempting to understand a bit of its history, connecting with the locals, and really doing what they can to make sense of an otherwise really challenging and mysterious issue like the Fouke monster. And so Lyle has been probably the biggest proponent of this phenomenon, and as he just had mentioned, it sounds like this is something that is going to continue to grow and continue to be of interest for people for years to come.
Yeah, and I mean, even once again, just to see the interest of, like he was saying, international travelers coming specifically here to Fouke, traveling from abroad to come here and see the places, see Boggy Creek, stuff like that. It really has become an international phenomenon. And we can thank things like the 50th anniversary of the movie, even the release of the movie. Like he was saying, it really did help highlight something in a different way.
Yeah, I think so. And in some way, he's done the work of an ethnographer, meaning he's gone in and collected reports of locals in the community and historic reports from throughout the years that date back to around the time from when that movie was made, 50 years ago, so 72, where you just had someone, as he had mentioned, coming in really without a lot of experience in the production of putting something like this together in a way that who would have thought it would have been as big as it is. And so now Charles Pierce's daughter, Pamela Pierce, has done some amazing work to remaster the footage. It's not a remake, it's a remaster. So now it's gone through DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, and that's now available for the public at large. And so they've kind of gone back and made sure to kind of showcase some of the things that weren't really as noticeable in the original film. And so we've gone through the years here in more recent times to kind of help bring some of the people that were involved with the making of that film together in a celebratory fashion. So I'm really glad to see the community's interest in this is still an ongoing thing, even after half a century later. Yeah.
And even though horror films, even the genre of film that this is, have evolved and gone somewhere else, this is still a seminal work of art that people consistently turn back to for reference whenever they're doing a film of this kind. So it's pretty incredible to see that, you know, and to see the fanfare that it still has. Now, speaking of ethnography and different stories, I just went and got my Yeti cast a second ago, the Shackleton Yeti.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the last casts he had, and I got to go get a cast for the display. When it comes to cryptids in Texas, our home state, there are quite a few out there, and you know, Chupacabra being one, Lake Worth monster right up there in your area. What do you make of the recent possible sighting of the Dogman out near the, was it El Paso? Was it the El Paso Zoo?
Well, apparently the Amarillo Zoo had released this security footage of a mysterious figure, which the city of Amarillo is now requesting help in an attempt to identify, which I think is really fun to even have a city propose something like this rather than keep it under wraps and maybe do a private investigation to where it's not going to scrutinize and, throw under the bus the reputation of a otherwise well-known city up in the Panhandle. And it's just one of the things that I think it could very well be something of a publicity stunt for the zoo. But even if it wasn't, that zoo's blown up all over national news at this point either way.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up, is because there has been a ton of conversation amongst the cryptid communities online with it. Even King Gerhardt here had some very strong opinions on it, things like that. And it's one of those, yes, it was very interesting to see them as a community reach out for assistance. And, whether it was something that was just posted because someone was like, oh, this just looks weird. And like Ken said, maybe an anomaly, maybe some oddly grown bush or topiary, something. I mean, it could be like a T-Rex topiary that just started rotting in some parts, and now it's just shaped like that instead of having a tail and arms. Who knows? But until we get to that point, to see a city actively put it out there, and like you said, to say, help us identify this, help us know what's going on here, I think is really interesting and something that we as a society really need to think about.
Yeah, you brought up the Lake Worth monster, and you had a similar issue where, as the story unfolded in the summer of 1969, it's something that really drew the attention of a lot of local monster hunters, you could say, that came, gun ready and just pretty much just about to blast anything that was in their path, which is actually a really dangerous thing to think that maybe now it's things have changed in some ways, but in some ways things are in many ways still the same. In Texas, it's kind of renowned about how the overall look on, the use of guns and things is pretty widely accepted. And so to even suggest that we have any mystery creatures or some kind of even known creature that's amiss or getting onto properties and doing things mischievous and otherwise unwanted, it's challenging for us to think that it won't cause a stir in the local communities to come and pretty much just guns a-blazing shoot anything that would seem to be otherwise harmful to the local wildlife. And so you mentioned the chupacabra and these types of things as well. In Texas, we have this idea of what's called the Texas blue dog, which is essentially the Texas version of the chupacabra. And I think that it's important to see that if whatever this is that's going on in Amarillo, the security footage is a still shot that's been blown up all over the news, and it says it's from some security footage, so it's an actual video or some kind of feed that they had stored or something that I don't know has been released. The main issue I find with all of this is that if that is the case and the city didn't want this to get out in such a way that it did, they probably would have hushed it up as soon as possible and said, there's nothing to this. We don't need this attention. But they're not. They're doing the exact opposite. And as you said, they're really kind of trying to garner the interest of anyone and everyone. And in some way, that can draw a lot of, local economical benefit by way of tourism, if not anything else, to the local zoo, which they probably badly need at a time where it's been difficult for anyone to get anything going by, through events and stuff. So
I don't know a zoo out there that doesn't need some help.
Right. It's something that I think is interesting because if you look at footage and you're trying to figure out what something is in a either like a game cam or any time you take a picture of something, you think you've captured it. There are a lot of ways you can easily find out if it's something that's in the background. So let's say if this was just some kind of like a bush or a plant or some misshapen object that's always there, you could just go and take a picture of it at any time and see that it's always going to still be there, or maybe it's there in a different kind of shape. Now, what it seems to be is that it appears, as some would describe, as some kind of like weird animal, furry creature standing on two legs. Now, it's easy to maybe insinuate that, but that might not be what it actually is. Someone could easily misidentify it, and it very well could be some trash or something. And I think that if it is an animal, and the other big issue is it wasn't described as being on the property of the zoo, like inside messing with animals. To their knowledge anyway, they say it's on the outside. So, I think that it's interesting to consider that if another strange cryptid, like a dogman or whatever is going on with some bipedal canid or something like this, is actually out there, what would it be doing by the zoo? And some people say, well, that's not really physiological in what we know in the fossil record. It doesn't seem to be that there could be something like a dogman, and that's really an interesting sort of debate. And an ongoing way in the
Sure.
community of people interested in this stuff. I think it could very well be something explainable, but maybe there is something behind the mystery, and in the sense that it could be a mystery creature. You know?
Well, absolutely, and it's hard to put anything out of the realm of possibility, especially one of the things that we brought up on the show with you on there over the last year, for instance, during a pandemic, over 500 new species discovered. Brand new, never knew about them. Like, the world was in lockdown, and we still found 500 new species.
It's amazing.
You know, when you start looking at the fact of Dragon Man was found in the last year, the huge, oversized humanoid skull that has been confirmed, not fake. It is twice the volume of a normal human head and comes from a person probably about 8 to 9 feet tall. This was found in the bottom of a well in China. Some guy on his deathbed told his son, like, hey, you know, years ago I found this thing plowing the field and it just freaked the hell out of me. So I dropped it down the well. You may want to check that out. And sure enough, confirmed new hominid. You know, that when you think about stories all over the world of giants, hobbits, things like that, yeah, absolutely. There is a point in the fossil record there where this existed. So to say outright, which you're not saying, but for somebody to say outright, like, we have nothing in the fossil record that shows that there is a bipedal canid out there, that does not mean that something couldn't be out there.
Yeah, I think if people describe something, let's say if you get rid of all these different cases where it's just hoaxing and or pranks and, you know, which a lot, many can be attributed to that. I don't think it amounts to the total sum of all of these cases that people are totally delusional or totally misidentifying something. And if people are seeing some kind of bipedal anything that's not a hominid, that opens the doors for all kinds of progress and developments that can be made, because, as has been mentioned earlier in many of the talks, it seems like science isn't really just a set standard of here's what it is and here's what it has to be. Rather, it's an ongoing revision of ideas and models that we use to describe what we find in nature. And I think that should be the case with whatever animals and species that we know are around, that we can still learn about and that we might discover along the way. And so if we don't have the right frame of mind or parameters in wildlife biology or zoology in general to really make sense of these things that we find, it might be filtered out. And I think that's where you have a lot of these findings, like you just mentioned, the Dragon Man skull and many of these different ideas of, like, the Denisovans or Homo floresiensis, which is the Hobbit man that's thought not only to be found remnants of pre-existing species, but maybe even still around.
There.
That's amazing to consider that there are academics out there considering this in a way that's really kind of revising a lot of the scientific thought, academic thought in any of these subjects. So I'm a proponent that we can still make new discoveries, but maybe not necessarily that those things are new, but they are new to our models of our understanding and how we're adapting to something that maybe people, as we described earlier, ethnozoologically speaking, has been known for a very long time in the cultures that know their own environments, whereas other people coming in think this is impossible, this can't be, this is not supposed to exist, so it doesn't. So it's like if it gets filtered out.
Yeah, another great example is the pygmy deer of the hills of Vietnam that was found maybe close to a decade ago now, that naturalists had been told about by the tribes that lived in the jungle, stuff like that. They're like, yeah, okay, a deer with gill-like flaps on its nose that open and close to breathe. All right, you know, okay, that kind of sounds like the tribes from South America or Africa that are saying that they saw a brontosaurus, you know. Well, the thing is, they found the deer, and they exist. So what do you do at that point? You know, like, as a scientist, when you're like, I don't know, I'm a naturalist. I've been out doing this thing for a hot ticket minute. Cataloged all kinds of species, nothing like that in the fossil record, nothing like we didn't have mammals with flaps on their noses like that look like gills. But sure enough, these things existed, and they're there.
Yeah.
So
I think that Lyle made a good point earlier about how, eventually when the point comes to where a species of what we, generally call Bigfoot may finally be recognized, that a lot of the people involved with the research behind this phenomenon are probably going to have some sort of vindication by the people who otherwise ostracized them or ridiculed them because of a presumed belief in something which otherwise is like a collection of data points which shows that there seems to be some phenomenon. We don't know exactly what it is. I think some people have an idea. I think some people feel like they do know based upon personal accounts and experiences.
Sure.
A lot of it may seem anecdotal, but again, you take a mountain of anecdotal evidence into a court of law, and it's very convincing. But that's not necessarily the same as demonstrable things that you can repeat in the lab or something.
Yeah.
So it's hard to really say that if we did find one, it would represent all of Bigfoot. So there's a lot of that I think we can learn from, but it still just opens the doors to more.
It's interesting that you bring up the court of law point, because like by all evidentiary rules, this would be able to get in. However, the evidentiary rules for science are 180 degrees different.
Right.
And we've had the debate on the show before, like, will it take a body? Like, what do we think it will take for us to scientifically be willing to take a look at this? Granted, with all of the wildlife studies going on, all the nature studies going on, a lot of these parks and wildlife folks have been looking to Bigfoot groups, stuff like that, because they're already out in the middle of the woods. They're already out on untrailed sections, putting up trail cams, things like that. So they're actively trying to build that network with these independent researchers so that they can get copies of trail cam footage for their own actual nature studies, which is really cool. And a great way for science and the public to cooperate together to come to an end. But yeah, the question is, will that come about to something, with the mass amount of data being gathered and more people out with trail cams, or will it take a body?
Yeah, well, from the people that I've talked to and asked this same very question about how, when it comes down to what will finally be accepted, getting some perspective from people like Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who's a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University, probably the foremost academic in the subject of Bigfoot. I'd say that based upon my interactions with him, he is very much of the impression that it does take not just scientists, but citizen scientists, and through a massive amount of data collection by people involved in the field, whether they're scientists or not, to hopefully systematically process and make sense of that data in a way that does help, because scientists aren't always out in the field. And you have a lot more people who aren't credentialed scientists gathering data, whether that's good quality or poor quality data. It's still data, and in some way we would like to hope that it can be the best quality it can either way. But the reality is, and as Meldrum had mentioned, is that it seems like scientists are often reliant upon, in many projects, the efforts of citizen scientists and citizen science to be able to actually establish a lot of the information which otherwise science people involved with certain institutions and things like this wouldn't normally be able to do without the help, because it's not just a few people being able to process this information. It's a lot of people making efforts to either catalog or tally or make a consensus about certain populations all over. Yeah. So I think that it is a very joint process where you have the integration of both the academic and scientific establishment along with the the public sector, where you have a cooperative effort being made to try to make sense of this, and mostly on the part of citizens with respect to the Bigfoot subject.
Yeah, and to that point, even the fact of the fractal of scientists, citizen scientists, everything else. One of the hurdles that we have to come to and overcome is I guess really that gatekeeper concept, and the fact of, well, when you're studying things like this and you are studying the actual way that this track is made, there are very few people in the world who specialize in the morphology of footprint, things like that. So getting the evidence into their hands and getting their evidentiary stamp of approval on things where they're at least, and there's a couple of them here in America that are wicked high up there, and even they are intrigued by the footprint evidence. Everything else, they're like, I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of hearsay. But as a scientist who specializes in this is really compelling evidence.
Yeah, I think so. And even Meldrum, who's a specialist in primate locomotion and foot morphology, I think is a really important part of understanding the possible relationship between these mystery creatures, which seem to have some kind of humanoid, hominid type morphology with what we're seeing in known primate species. And that, it might not necessarily be a one-for-one, but it gives us a good sense of like a baseline to work from when we know here's what something we can have as a factual basis of knowledge is. Here's what we're collecting by way of like anecdotal evidence. So I think when that surmounts to this pretty big picture of points of data collected together, it is very compelling, and I think enough so to have people like Dr. Meldrum and many others to really try to give credence to this otherwise very challenging subject.
Oh, absolutely, and admittedly a challenging subject, even by their own say-so, that like this is something that most of my colleagues would ridicule me for even looking at. But as with any good paranormal researcher, which they are not, they are actual scientific researchers studying primates, genealogical chains and morphologies. And to hear them say the same thing as, let's say, a Freddie Silva, that sure, 80%, I will concede, 80 to 85% of crop circles are fake. The issue is the 20 to 15% that aren't, and we need to be investigating that. We need to be deeply looking into that. And Dr. Meldrum's very much the same way, where yes, there is a ton of fakery out there. There's a ton of fur evidence, hair evidence, things like that. And a big one right now is the oil print evidence, like oil from the skin on handprints on windows, things like that that's been gathered. That's pretty incredible. But to hear them even say that, yes, most footprints that we find, not anything of what we're talking about, but those 10 to 15% are so compelling that we've got to look at them. We have to keep looking at them.
I think so. When you have not just the idea of physical eyewitness testimony and sightings and those types of encounters that are just described by someone who's trying to make sense of what they saw, you also pair that up with the physical footprints, the things that we can actually use to kind of make these casts to show that there is some indention or depression in the ground. You also have the ideas of both DNA and scat and hair, blood, and these ideas that maybe there are other things that can be captured, like vocalizations or audible captures of recordings, things that might show that they have a language or some kind of collection of vocal sounds that are used to either intimidate, to express some form of distress, or all these things like we see in primatology already. I think that there are a lot of these ideas that are beyond just the physical sightings and even just the footprints, which are most of, I think, what people immediately relate the idea of Bigfoot to, that are overseen, but may also help to kind of muddy the waters, because people often try to relate several things collectively together that sound good and seem good, but might not always fit. And that's a challenge for anyone, whether a scientist or not. But I think that there are several aspects of this that help to establish a pretty good, compelling body of what we could think of as evidence, but it might not always hold up in the lab or in court. As we said earlier, it could be very different either way, but I think that there is enough of all of those things to show that something's going on. It should make anyone curious, at least, to look into it. And so we have people trying to do that.
Exactly. Now, before we let you go, because we need to wrap up. We're getting ready for the viewing of Legend of Boggy Creek. We have to wrap up our broadcast. What would you like to see in the cryptid community within the next year? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I think that my outlook on this whole subject, in cryptozoology has really shifted around over the years, but I think that the cooperation with the scientific community has to improve. People, I think, always see it as one or the other, and that they can't coincide. And I really think that's really going to be difficult for the general public at large to feel comfortable with this being okay with any of these types of subjects or cryptids, because it's something that has been relegated to the sort of the loony bin.
To the fringe.
Yeah, it's
to
the fringe of society. I think we need to do more to bring it out of the fringe into the forefront of serious academic discussion through not just discussing it, but by trying to weigh in on things that are compelling enough to be shown in a way that is demonstrable, that we can find out ways that it's not just a singular account, but we can weigh all of these different things together. I would like to see people be more considerate in their field research so that they're not doing what we call confirmation bias and really just looking for what they want to see and find, but really just weighing in what we know can be found out there, what we are finding, regardless of what we really want to find or not. We just have to go with the facts. And I think that really challenges a lot of people in this community, because we have the issue of a faith-based system of operation, and that doesn't account for everyone, but I think it does affect the overall outlook in a sense that becomes almost religious. And I think that we have to be careful, because the scientific community is not going to cooperate with those ideas. The religious community is not going to cooperate with some of those things, and I think it stills more division. We need to be careful in not furthering that division, but by working together to be accepting, to be open-minded, to do better field research. And I think we're doing a little bit of that here and where we can, as we did an attempt to do last summer in one of our expeditions, and I think that can be something we can really help to maybe encourage with any wildlife photography and any type of effort being made to just explore nature, because it's not really always just about going out and just trying to find cryptids. You're probably never going to find any cryptids realistically. Statistically speaking, almost no one is going to see any type of mystery animal in their life, but for those who do, almost all of them didn't mean to. And I think that's one of the things is that we can always hope to go out there and find things, as Lyle had mentioned in his closing talk. I think it's more important to realize that we just need to be able to approach the situation the best we can and as prepared as we could, as we had mentioned earlier, but also to consider the possibility that we don't know everything that's out there, and that we're entering into sometimes their territory, not ours, so to speak. So
that's right.
I think it's good to be able to kind of use that as a good method, or to continue study known established sciences and really get more familiar. And I'll do what I can to continue studying zoology and anthropology and archaeology, because those interest me, but I know that it can help me with everything else that I'm doing as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, I cannot wait until your book on Aurora comes out. When can we be looking for that? Yeah,
well, this year is the 125th anniversary, so I'm getting it cranked out before the end of the year, and I think that it'll be just in time for this upcoming event, the Texas UFO Conference, that our good buddy Craig Will here is also helping put together. And so that's something that I'd like to be able to share for this type of anniversary, because it's over a century that this legend has been just as the Legend of Boggy Creek has sort of really had an effect. I think this is the same case, and we see it in many ways with the subject of UFOs and that whole side of the lore as well. So appreciate you bringing that up. It's going to be based upon the Aurora legend of 1897, and so that's something I'm excited to go do. And this is also the 75th anniversary of the Roswell event. I'm going to go out to Roswell, and on my way there, maybe I'll be able to stop out in Amarillo and go check out that zoo and see if there's anything afoot.
Right. Well, once again, as always, thank you so much for your time, Daniel. Always love the conversation. Let everybody know where they can go to keep up with the Vortex, everything that you're doing, all your videos, appearances, everything else.
Sure, yeah. I'm available on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. You can go check out my name, full name, which is just Daniel Allen Jones, or you can check The Vortex on YouTube for media productions on all kinds of great interviews, on location segments and events, and presentations like we've seen here today. So that's something I'm always glad to share with anyone, and whoever has any questions or would like to continue the discussion, let's do it there. So appreciate it, Chris. It's always an honor.
Most definitely, man. Love having you on. While you're online checking out everything from Daniel Allen Jones and the Vortex, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm, folks. CuriousRealm.com is your home for all of our episodes, all of our live streams. You can follow us on Facebook there. You can come join the group. We have some fantastic conversations there. Over 1,000 members now, over 5,000 followers on the Facebook. So thank you for everybody. Find us on Rumble, Minds, all the alternative platforms. Stop on by and check us out. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, stay curious. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Awesome, man.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault on our website, CuriousRealm.com. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast services, as well as YouTube, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV through the APR TV app, available on all app markets. Curious Realm is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more great content or to become a sponsor of Curious Realm or other podcasts, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. And remember, the other side is always watching.